Welcome to the Diva Conversation. This is a series of interviews conducted by me, Nerj Diva, Vice President of the Development Committee of the European Parliament, Conservative Member of the European Parliament, with senior officials of the EU. These will be commissioners, councillors, other MEPs, and then other important people who come and have a role to play in EU lawmaking or in the EU generally. For far too long, you have not been told what's going on here and who is doing what. So I'm going to bring together all the three elements of the EU lawmaking process: MEPs, members of the Council, and members of the Commission, together around this table to tell you what is going on, what is being planned, and to get your comments. Today I have with me the Development Commissioner Andris Pielbags, former Education Minister and then Deputy Prime Minister of Latvia. He started life as a communist. He found the free market when he was in Latvia as a minister. He oversaw Latvia being removed from the yoke of Soviet communism and becoming a free country under free people. And then he became commissioner and he was one of the stars of the Barroso I Commission. When he's as energy commissioner, he oversaw the European energy policy to maybe less dependent on Russian energy and to be more independent, to be more green, to be more sustainable. And Andris, welcome now as the Development Commissioner to the Diva Conversation. I wanted to ask you, Commissioner, how do you reconcile the fact that you wrested control of Latvia from the yoke of Soviet regulation and Soviet communist control and made Latvia a free and independent country with less regulation, and then you saw Latvia becoming a part of the EU's plethora of regulation? How do you marry this idea of more regulation coming from Brussels to a country which you know would prosper with less regulation?
Well, Nerj, I think it's a very pertinent question, and it also relates to myself because my personal biography sometimes is misunderstood. So I was born in '57 when Latvia was already incorporated in the Soviet Union. An awakening period has been rather long. There have been some people, courageous people, fighting against regime, but they have been very far and few. At the same time, the majority of Latvian population, including myself, really wanted freedom. Basically, we wanted to speak out of our minds and to do what we think is really needed for us, for our children, for our society. And that made this non-violent resistance to the regime that brought down the Soviet power. So that means that what we looked upon, that we should be able to decide ourselves what we like and what we dislike. And that is completely would be wrong to compare our experience in Soviet Union, where we have been incorporated after the Second World War, actually already before the Second World War, seized, occupied. And when we made our choice to join European Union. And when we joined European Union, I was for the side that was in favor of joining European Union. But for most people, they have been skeptical. They're saying, well, we don't gain too much, but our kids will be better off. Because what they saw that the union is based between the countries and people that share the same values and on the economical prosperity-oriented platform. So what they did not expect the miracles that they will be, but what they expected that the lives of their children will be more in security and also more in prosperity. So that's why I would say that it was our choice. And still, in a way, Latvia will always have the opportunity to question whatever decision will be made, and people could always resist any decision government makes to join, what particular regulation by just sending them away from the political decision-making platform.
Admittedly, you have more security, certainly, and you have more certainty of the future, being a part of the wider, larger EU. But I don't want to pursue the subject any further than to ask you whether you think we are still doing too many regulations from Brussels, given how enterprising your people are and how able they are to develop markets and do what they want without the dead hand coming from here.
Well, it depends on the subject. Let's say the internal market, but I partially also on energy. I would say the problem is that a lot of regulations that agreed between countries and also with Parliament are not just implemented. So I think it is basically it's lack of implementations that face new regulations coming. So in a way, countries themselves are partly responsible that the regulations
for implementing,
exactly,
and they don't
if you
implement.
Exactly, if you implement, then you look at bypass, trying perhaps we could achieve the result. So in a way, union, if we agree on union, we should be much more open.
Now
to
you're
implement
saying
what we
something
agree.
very interesting, something that I've been constantly questioned in Britain about. In Britain, we gold plate EU regulations, so they can become even more rigorous and more regulated than what was originally coming from Brussels. Now, you have said just now that it takes a lot of time for you to implement the regulations that are coming from Brussels. Some of it never at all, or in the distant future. So that gives you room to maneuver, which in Britain we don't have. But I want to move on. As Energy Commissioner, you were one of the stars of the first Barroso Commission. And one of the things you set out to achieve was more independence for European energy. And I think you said that you want to reduce the dependence on Russian energy by 20% by 2020. Are we on track for that?
I think we are. And there are some events in the world that helps us, because when I said that basically I put only on two issues, energy efficiency and renewables as alternative. For better, now we have much more active LNG market, so we have actually the potential to be even less dependent from any one supplier, because LNG market has evolved immensely. And now it is important there are conditions for investment, for LNG, for pipelines, for connecting the market. But then we come again, the regulation in the internal market should be the same all across the Union.
Exactly. Is Nabucco working properly?
No.
That the pipeline that's supposed to come from Iraq, Kyrgyzstan to Turkey to Romania, Bulgaria through?
No, it's still under negotiation. There have been always some progress, but it's still not there. There have been some legal aspects being cleared, but I think there is a difficulty that a lot of European energy companies are locked on long-term contracts, take-or-pay contracts. So they are rather reluctant to invest in new pipes. And then the question comes, should the state invest? And our understanding is that energy is profitable business and companies should be able to invest. So that means we need to strengthen competition rules, that new players could come in the market and try to also to make possibilities for investment in the pipes.
So the people delivering the energy should not necessarily be the people who own the pipeline.
I am transporting energy source to consumers, but I am not exactly producing or consuming business. And that's, I think, what we have all the time is discussion with Russians, because Russians would like to have everything. And I'm saying it's not logical. It's wrong. Even if you're doing this in Russia, in Europe, we will never
Now you are
do
the
this.
Development Commission. By the time we have finished this interview, about 200 people would have died of starvation. Their stomachs would have burst and they would have died while we are chatting here. This is a dreadful situation to find ourselves in. Now, on development issues, you have come up with a new idea, which you have introduced as Agenda for Change. You are saying, if I'm correct in understanding what you're trying to say, that by doing Agenda for Change, where you are going to put 88 million euro more into democracy, good governance, rule of law and human rights programs, out of the total DCI budget, you will accelerate growth?
Yes, it sounds paradoxical perhaps, that what we see that if there is no human rights, you can't expect the growth, basically. Yeah, you would say, well, look at China and the part of the six, but even there, people are able to travel. They sometimes speak out their minds, not always, but there is a growing ability of civil society really to stand for their rights. Then the middle class evolves. There are economic rights. Perhaps you would say they are missing some political rights, but a lot of economic rights in the countries where we have seen the growth. You can't decouple two. And we have seen North Africa, that's the worst example, where we have invested a lot of supporting people and the regimes collapsed. And so the people is out on the street and with very difficulties really to rebuild their lives for new growth. So I think this political dimension you can't decouple from development support because only political society gives a chance for economic growth.
I understand that. I understand that freedom and democracy, the rule of law and good governance are very important. I can see the link between the rule of law, property rights, and the rights of owning companies, buying, selling your home, and having a legal system that functions to growth. And so in China and Vietnam and even Singapore, if I may say this, the rule by law, not the rule of law necessarily, but the rule by law has actually encouraged economic growth because as long as the legal system works properly, then people know that they can invest, they can get compensation, they can go to the courts, they can get redress, and so on. Whether democracy in its sense that we understand it here in Europe, where you have an adversarial system, whether that system will apply properly in developing countries, I'm not sure about. Because I think it's a cultural development too. That when you have a certain level of sustenance and development and money, then you are comfortable and secure enough to go and shout at someone who may be a very important person. But you know that what you're saying is going to be listened to. So I think in some ways, Andres, I'm going to step out a bit out of line as a politician. Separating the rule of law, property rights, commercial rights, and governance and good governance in terms of corruption from democracy, i.e. the right to oppose, the right to argue, do all the things we do.
I think we understand each other quite well, actually, because the formulation democracy is that I have a choice. I have a choice to be here with you, I have a choice to move, I have a choice. And I think that is what I understand with democracy. I have a choice to vote and not to vote. Political system, I have choice to accept or not to accept. So I think that is the crucial. This is what I understand. It does not mean necessarily a system like UK system is. It's not necessarily this. But I think the personal freedom is crucial. And without it, you can't expect also economic development. If you don't feel safe, how you will make investment? You will never make investment.
So I think I'm trying to say is that we need to be careful when we talk about democracy. What sort of democracy we are talking about? If it's an adversarial democracy, I personally don't believe adversarial democracy works in Africa.
But I would say the freedom, African, whatever, Malian, is the same as Latvian. So for me, it's no different. So we are trying to achieve the same, that I have ability to choose what to do and what not to do. And I think that's what we are trying really to take care of. Because if it's dictatorship, I have no choice. Basically, I am under the spell of the dictatorship.
But there is another element of danger in talking about democracy without really specifying. There is a culture of winner takes all. So I stand for election, I win the election is fought properly, fairly, international observers say I have won the election, then I take everything.
But after 4 years, if it's the democracy, after 4 years, you should be careful.
Precisely.
The next will take all.
But there will be not be 4 years. I take it all forever. This has happened in many countries in Africa. Zimbabwe is a case in point. Mugabe was elected fairly. And he never held a proper election after that. So how do we then say to all these African or other leaders who had turned themselves from democrats to dictators, yeah, I was elected.
True, but there is constitution. There is constitution and constitutional court. So constitutions specify how many times I could be re-elected. And we follow these developments that the constitutional rule should be followed. We have different constitutions, but that I think is a part of the game.
So the independent judiciary is much more important in that case. Because if you have an independent judiciary, they will mark down and they will make sure the constitution is enacted.
But if there is no the elections, then I will sooner or later will take over independent judiciary. So both are needed.
Precisely.
You need both, independent elections and independent judiciary, because only both together in symbiosis works. Where I would agree that I think sometimes we simplify developments in Asia. We just try saying, well, it should be like Europe. Not necessarily. We should, I think, follow from the point of your personal freedom.
Commissioner, talk about something which is very much in the minds of many people, not only the MEPs, but also the people in the NGOs and the people who are working for poverty alleviation. 75% of the world's poor do not live in poor countries. They live in middle-income countries. For example, 7 provinces in India have hundreds of millions of poor people, but India as a whole is not a poor country according to the GDP. So how do we stop thinking in terms of GDP and think in terms of pockets of poverty and how we address this?
I think that is crucial. So, well, I think for fighting poverty that the government, elected governments have full responsibility. What we can provide, it's just an aid. And then we should look, do we really make our aid makes a game changer? Perhaps our aid better it would be implemented for fighting HIV AIDS on some particular niches in the middle income countries that we are looking. But to have a bilateral development poverty alleviation program in Brazil or in China and India, for the EU doesn't make any more sense. Even if I agree that figures are huge, just because our impact is small. If we do this in Burkina Faso, that makes a difference. If we do it in Somalia, it makes a difference. In India, it's not felt. So I would be saying, let's try to find specific niches where we make a difference saving people's lives, but don't try to duplicate the government's poverty alleviation program, because I believe the government should have full responsibility because it's their people and they should take full responsibility fighting poverty. Like in Brazil, there is huge poverty fighting program. We are not contributing for it, but we always praise Brazilian government for addressing this issue. And there is an issue also psychological. Why Indians think we don't need them? Well, actually they care about it, but it's a bit of proud. You are giving us aid. Well, no, we are not giving you aid. We are giving support to your people.
Poor people.
Exactly. And I think we need to find also good wording for this support because the country is getting more proud.
Could we not work with provinces? The EU bilateral with a province in a big country?
No, I think it will never work because it's still government takes overall responsibility. What our experience is that we need to work or with country government as a whole or not at all in this direct way of the making bilateral
Commissioner, I'm not sure you're right on this because we will come increasingly to find that even with the EIB, with all our lending programs, that if you deal with the central government, the money may not go to those places which need it most.
Perhaps I was not so clear. For example, Pakistan, we work in these tribal areas. Yeah?
Exactly.
But it is with agreement of central government. So we don't jump over.
Of course.
So that's what is the point. So you can work if the government has agreement.
If you could go to Delhi and say to Delhi, look, we don't want to send this money to you centrally. We will go and talk, if with your permission, to the Chief Minister of Bihar or Chief Minister of Orissa, 2 of the poorest provinces in India, that we want to deal with you directly, with the permission of the central government.
I think it's very reasonable idea, but for us, for EU, the proposals I made that we are stopping bilateral aid in India and very much focus on Africa, because basically the poverty has a partially big name, it's Africa, because in Africa it's the most deep-rooted and the number of people is growing. So we are a bit late in this cycle, and I think Africa should be key engagement for us.
But Commissioner, there's another side to this coin. This side we say we don't do any aid to India. This side you say we want influence in India.
Well, influences India, I think it's a bit different because we are a big consumer market, we are investors, we are knowledge, we have a lot of reason to cooperate in fights against climate change, also in clean energy. We have a lot of engagements with India that we can do, but bilateral power education program, I would definitely like to focus on Africa.
So we will shift then, because a lot of EU's thinking in terms of influence around the world has been we must give them aid. Now
No,
we are
I
saying
think we should change it.
we are saying we are going to trade with you. We are your biggest trading partner.
Exactly.
Forget the aid. We are now using our influence as our member states and as the EU to do partnership trading.
Exactly.
Without
I
money.
think well, there will be some money. We propose a partnership instrument because you can't do students exchange or you need some support. But I think the logic should change because the world has changed for the better. A lot of countries have evolved. There are still a lot of poverty pockets, but the country's mentality has evolved. They are growing. It's important that definitely we keep the contact because we have experience how to build social nets, how to really get the more cohesive society. It should not be just rich and poor and nobody in between. The middle class is important and our experiences are useful, but it does not mean that we always say, here we are, we will fight poverty in you. And they say, well, yes, we have a poverty, but we will manage ourselves.
This brings me to my next point. It is now estimated that about 6 billion euro is lost in the EDF, the European Development Fund, because we don't have coherence and coordination. Member states do one thing, we do another thing, and because of this 6 billion, this is not a small sum. It's nearly 40% of the DCI that you spend every year. Now, isn't it completely mad that we lose 6 billion because we are duplicating, we are replicating, we are doing something other people are doing, we are not coordinating, and the worst of all, Commissioner, this Parliament has no oversight of this matter. So we don't even know what's going on because we are not allowed to look into that budget. It is crazy that the European taxpayers' money is not having proper oversight. What do we do about this?
Well, I will separate in two parts. For the first, we are trying now to build so-called in bureaucratic Jean-Jaurès programming, but exactly that we do exactly knowing what another will do and in the pace of countries' needs. We have done this for South Sudan, for example, and we will continue to work with all the countries across the board. Now we will go to Laos and on all of other countries in the world. It will be step-by-step process. So we will gain this 6 billion that we actually lost in delivery. For the second, well, you are asking about basically that European Development Funds that actually by defeat evaluation serves us well has one structural weakness because it was incepted when the Parliament was not strong, that there is lack of Parliament supervision, and it's definitely anachronism. In new EDF regulation, we will propose that the Parliament has clear oversight, and after 2020, in our proposal, it should be part of European budget with full control of the Parliament. But I would say it should be already done now with the next financial perspective.
Because then the parliamentary element of the joint partnership with the ACP parliamentarians can come into play.
Well, in a way, it's a bit controversial in it because you are not able really to control the content. But when it comes to budget discharge, you have full control.
Yes.
So you will nail me for discharge. So it's a bit strange thing. And then you have ACP, so you can give advice. So I think it should be just put house in order because there are some elements that give Parliament discharge, and then when you design the program, you have no responsibility. How it could be made like this, but it is historical development.
My final question, Commissioner, it has exercised the minds of many people, including our taxpayers. In 2002, GFI Institute estimated that something like 435 billion US dollars was lost in illicit financial flows from the developing countries, money that is hidden in our banks, in offshore accounts, and so on. Now it is estimated that nearly 1,000 billion, 1 trillion, is being lost or taken from the developing countries. So we give from your budget and your work 50 billion or 60 billion to the developing countries to alleviate poverty and to help them develop. At the same time, 1,000 billion, 20 times that, is coming from hidden sources. Stolen money from their leaders, hiding money, companies who act and work in these countries, and this money is coming in and is hidden in all our accounts, Swiss banks and all this stuff. This is a disgrace, and we have to do something about it. Now, I understand, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that the new regulation that you are bringing in to make things more transparent. You're telling European companies, if you're working in developing countries and you're taking out coal or gold or vanadium or titanium out of their earth, you have to publish openly, transparently what you're paying in terms of royalties and revenues, so that people know in that country and here how much money is being received by that state and their ministers. Now, that is brilliant, that is important, to have that transparency. But there's an article in that regulation, Article 38, Paragraph 5, which says that if the country concerned says it is illegal to publish it, you are asking these companies, okay, then you don't have to publish it. Take a bet, Commissioner. Every country will pass some internal legislation saying it is illegal to publish it, and we will be back where we were.
Well, I see but there are two issues at the same. One, I think, is sovereignty issue. Each country should have some understanding about sovereignty. And if I think it's EU regulations that comes, I would exactly say that each country would very much hesitate to make it as a secret. I think that's where the society pressure and opposition pressure will be huge enough to open up all the secrets that is. And the second, the countries have made a progress. I think the countries that have been the most poor suffered twice, from colonialism and from the Cold War. And they are recovering only now. I think we don't need to make the perhaps false impression that with all the deficiencies the countries are having, that they are not improving. Because it's a lot of deficiencies, but they are improving. There is uphill struggle for them. So I would be more positive on this. They will also grab this opportunity, because it's very difficult to come from this vicious circle. And if we give this opportunity, I would be much more optimistic, Nirj, that they will take it. Because I still believe in good in society. You just don't work with a stick. You work with a carrot and giving opportunity. And look at Latvia, for example. In 20 years, we have evolved from the Soviet satellite, occupied territory, to free, proud country which fights corruption. Well, there are clear cases, but there is no culture of this, and we managed to do this. We are a small country and still encouraging example for others. Look at Poland. Everybody said Poland in the EU will be a problem, and Poland is not a small country, it's 50 million people. And look also, with all the difficulties we have, Croatia is coming and joining us. Look what happened in Myanmar. People are changing against the dictatorship and look for Europe, even seen sometimes as weak. So I would be more positive about this. I know that you should be very criticizing as a parliament, saying why it is so. But I believe that the world is changing for the better, and we need to give opportunities, not only go criticism.
I believe, Commissioner, in a stick and the carrot, not only the
well,
carrot.
I think stick sounds too bad, but I would say so somehow pushing in the direction stick, I think, does not work against sovereignty.
Thank you very much for this open, unprescribed discussion between the European Commissioner and a member of the European Parliament about matters that concern us both. I wanted to do this, and we will continue to do this, because we want to make it public to our taxpayer and our electors what we do here together, the executive and the legislation. And thank you very much, Commissioner, for your frank and open discussion.
Thank you, Ned.
Thank you. If you want to make suggestions to me about who we should have, or if you want to make a contribution to the blog or by email about what you have seen, please email me at nerj.diva, at europal.europa.eu, or look at my website www.nerjdiva.com, or on YouTube www.youtube.com Diva TV, as shown on your screen just now. Thank you for being with us.